Today I'm going to be speaking with Talia Lavin, who is author of the book Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. Talia, great to have you on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
So you did something very interesting, which is you and potentially harrowing, which is you jumped into some of the dark recesses of the internet that I will often mention, but recommend my audience not dive into. And this includes white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and all sorts of different areas. Talk a little bit about why you did this and sort of how you dipped your toes into this pool to begin with.
I'm a Jewish woman, and I've been writing about the far right for a few years before the book even came out. And with that came a response from the white supremacist, white power community. And my reaction to various waves of harassment, that were vehemently misogynistic, vehemently anti-Semitic, was essentially to, instead of kind of curling up and shrinking back and stop talking, was to dive deeper. I wanted to see who these people were, where they were coming from, how they were getting to my Twitter feed. And it was sort of a situation where the abyss was looking at me, and I decided to gaze back and drag what I saw back out into the light.
So what did you find about the source of many of the sort of hateful and trolling messages that you were getting?
So I decided to take a broad view and look at both the development of the contemporary white power movement and what it looks like, how it manifests, and where they congregate. So I spent a lot of time looking at particularly an encrypted chat app called Telegram, and which has like very strong free speech protections and sort of never bans content, really. So it's become kind of a thriving ground for white supremacists who, particularly in 2019, faced some bannings from mainstream social media like Facebook and Twitter. And so that's where I spent a lot of my book research looking into. And I found a lot of different tendencies and communities of interest within the white power movement that I spend the book Culture Warlords exploring.
Did you or talk a little bit about how you existed in some of these spaces? I mean, did you develop a character or a series of characters, alter egos that you kind of took on?
Yeah, so I didn't actually set out to write a gonzo journalism book. It's just that when you're a Jewish woman and when you've been kind of an outspoken anti-fascist for years, it's hard to get in the front door. People who are white supremacists won't grant you an interview. One of my earlier attempts was to try and get into, there's a sort of powerlifting based white supremacist pagan cult that has these solstice celebrations, and I tried to get in just as a reporter. And much later, one of the guys I was talking to was like, "Oh, we would never let a Jew in, anyway." So, it was hard to get in the front door. But and so as a result, I found myself sort of having to get a little creative and find these backdoor routes, and that included making sock puppets, sock puppet accounts, to just kind of squat and listen. And in some other cases, having to be a little more proactive and inventing kind of identities from whole cloth in order to get into more private chats. And in one case, I infiltrated a white supremacist dating site, whitedate.net, with a whole character who didn't look like me or have my background, as kind of a coarse Brooklyn Jew. And I got these forlorn white supremacists looking for love to write love letters to their ideal white wife and send them to me. And I printed them in the book. And it was sort of a car crash between Nicholas Sparks and Mein Kampf.
Did you make any of what you would consider to be friends during this process?
Um, no. I mean, it's not generally my practice to make friends with people who want me dead.
Right.
But within my character, I mean, I tried not to be like that active an infiltrator. You know what I mean? You don't want to be the one amping up the stochastic terror. You want to say just enough to pass and remain in the room. But in one particular event, there was sort of a an MMA fight being organized between pagan white supremacists and Christian white supremacists to support the presidential run of a white nationalist Satanist. And so I
Hmm.
got deeply involved in the planning chats for that group and wound up talking pretty extensively to one Christian extremist, and telling him all about how his fascist love of Christ had saved my life. Just funny things to have to do from my apartment in Brooklyn.
As far, I'm interested in this religious component in your experience, kind of weaving your way through these communities. We know about the Christian roots of the KKK as an example, but at the same time, there are many people who get pulled into white nationalism and white supremacy who are not particularly religious. How relevant was religion, would you say, in these different enclaves?
Well, the group that I was studying primarily were sort of these radicalized white power guys, right? We know that within the mainline sort of MAGA movement, which has its fascistic undertones, um, religion plays quite a large role. This idea that Trump is selected by God and we must fight for him and everyone else serves Satan. Um, the group that I was speaking to tended to skew younger, were a little more disaffected with religion, but what they really took from religion, in the case of the Christian white supremacists, there was this absolute fixation on the Crusades,
Mm.
um, as kind of a lost cause, this battle between noble white warriors and swarthy interlopers that they kind of interposed onto contemporary anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim uh, dialogue. So it was kind of like them viewing themselves as crusaders and flying the Templar cross at racist rallies. Um, in the case of pagan white supremacists, heathen white supremacists, you had this fixation on Vikings, this idea of white manliness, and the idea of the Norse pantheon as an indigenous white European religion. And one of the things that sort of surprised and tickled me was that many heathen white supremacists are drawn to the worship of the Norse pantheon by the idea that Christianity was started by a Jew,
Mm.
uh, and is thus tainted by the Jewish taint forever. And so you can literally be Jesus Christ, and that's not enough for some anti Semites, which was sort of a funny discovery to make.
The people you came across, what portion did you get this? I mean, this is, it could be just difficult to tell, but did you get a sense of what portion would be willing to sort of go and actually take violence into their own hands in the real world versus how many of them are sort of existing in these online spaces and that's as far as they're willing to go?
So when I tallied up the Telegram groups I was involved in, and of course that's not the most scientific measure, but I had joined between 90 and 100 of these chats, and collectively they had tens of thousands of members,
Sure.
right? And one of the big problems facing researchers and journalists in this area is that it's quite simply very hard to tell which young man spewing violent and genocidal rhetoric is going to be the one that snaps. So, I have a close friend who is an anti fascist and who was several times threatened directly by Robert Bowers, who went on to allegedly shoot 11 Jews in the Tree of Life synagogue. And it's just very hard to tell. It's hard to tell, when you're looking at this sea of essentially stochastic terror, this sort of perpetual motion machine towards radicalization and violence, who is going to be the one to snap? And that's why I talk about how the importance isn't necessarily the raw numbers,
Yeah.
but about the tenor of the conversation. Um, and, when you are marinating in stochastic terror, marinating in racial violence, marinating in the dehumanization of your supposed racial enemies, this is an environment that's specifically cued to get people to snap, to radicalize, to engage in violence, to stockpile guns.
When I have interviewed former white nationalists and white supremacists, including folks like Frank Mink and many others of these folks who have now become anti-racist advocates, they almost unanimously tell the same story about how they were pulled in, which is that they sort of found either an attention or what they felt as support or community where they had an absence of it, typically in their family life growing up. Like it's almost cliche, but it's the story they almost all tell. Did you get any sense of, at the individual level, how the folks you came across ended up in these movements?
Yeah, I mean, particularly on the white supremacist dating site, there was a segment, in the bios where people described their politics and how they came to be on a white supremacist dating site. And
Right.
A lot of the stories started with YouTube. There were a lot of divorces in their backstories. There were a lot of people in the military. I would say that the most consistent theme was a sense of alienation.
Right.
And I think, as we all know, that sense of alienation, lack of community, desire for purpose, it crosses socioeconomic lines. It crosses geographical divides. It's really a question of sort of how deep is your feeling of alienation and displacement, and that can have a lot of different causes. I think it's a mistake when people say, oh, it's just toothless Cletus, in his mother's basement, when what I saw was really a movement that spanned geographical lines, socioeconomic lines. These were people with wives and sometimes spouses, sometimes people who were in college. The myth that everyone is sort of Southern and uneducated is really a self-absolving myth that white liberals use to say it couldn't be anyone in my neighborhood, couldn't be anyone in my school or my HOA, when in fact it could. It's just a matter of people feeling lost, and the white supremacist white power movement really offering you this mythos of you can become involved, you can save the white race, we will give you a sense of purpose in your life. And I think a lot of us are looking for a sense of purpose. A lot of us are feeling lost and alienated, and we all find that in different ways. But that's the sort of compelling argument they make is here's a chance to be part of a community of people saving the white race.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, there's a similar pattern to a lot of the people that get sucked into the cult of Trumpism, which is believing that it will provide solutions to problems that may well be real, but they get tricked about where the solutions are, and that seems to be a kind of interesting overlap in hearing you describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of any sort of radicalizing movement, right?
Yeah.
Is that they look at you, look at your vulnerabilities, look at what you're seeking, and then become that,
Right.
love bomb you. Although, frankly, the tenor of conversation is quite puerile and often very cruel. There's not a lot of love bombing going on, but there is a sense of like, you are a warrior, there's really a regression into very toxic and narrow gender roles. This idea of kind of, you will be a manly man, a warrior for the white race. An encouragement towards survivalism, towards stocking up guns, but really this sense of kind of propping up embattled masculinity and making that be part of a community that has this sort of overall quote unquote noble purpose.
The book is fascinating. It's Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. We've been speaking with the book's author, Talia Lavin. Talia, I so appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and the book is available on Amazon, at your local indie store, which you should please support during the pandemic, and everywhere books are sold. And it goes into great detail about not just contemporary white supremacy, but its roots.